everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Turn to the Stars. I'm Andrea Klim, and today we have a really special guest, A.T.Mann, A.T.Mann. Hi, Tad. How are you?
Very well, Andrea. How are you?
Doing great in this eclipse season, so we're all shifting and changing here, so it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Tad's come on today, and I'm really excited about this. This is the second time he's been on Turn to the Stars, and I met Tad back in 2014 to learn a new vision of astrology. And that's the topic of today's show is a new vision of astrology. And Tad has been, I would say he's a master of astrology, and he's been in this work for over 50 years. And he is also the author of 17 books, and they are about astrology and other sacred topics. And, you know, when I met you, Tad, we were on the Cape. And it was May of 2014. And it was a life-changing seminar weekend at Astrolabe.
That's right.
Yeah, and
with your daughter.
Yeah, with Lauren. Yeah, she was 16 at the time. She's 22 now. And it was fascinating because what you taught us that weekend changed our lives. It was all the way driving home, all the way home, we discussed my pregnancy with her and the experiences that I had, which were intense while I was pregnant with her. And it all showed up exactly at the time of using the logarithmic measurement scale that you taught us. And it was just an amazing conversation to have, because this is, I'm going to just go ahead and give this to you here and go ahead and explain what this means for everybody who's listening.
What, me?
Yeah, you.
Yeah, well, you know, the technique that I developed a long time ago, which I actually called A New Vision of Astrology for the most recent book, which was actually quite a few years ago. It was in 2004. Is unusual because when I first studied astrology, I did not know any other astrologers at all. And so looking at the basics of it, I began realizing that although the houses in the chart are numbered from 1 to 12, that no one uses that as a sequence. That struck me as very strange because I realized that everything in life is sequential. You know, life is a process in time.
Exactly.
And so I thought, why have a sequence in the chart without using it?
Right.
So I actually developed a technique and discovered previous works that actually did think about life as a process in time, but it actually wasn't astrological. But it was the work of someone called Rodney Collin and his book called The Theory of Celestial Influence. And it struck me as being very interesting because when I came across Rodney Collin's work, he was a student of a Russian mathematician called Uspensky, but also his master called Gurdjieff. That when I came across Collin's work, he talked about something called the Wheel of Life, and in that wheel, he actually, it was like 2/3 of a whole circle from birth until death. And in his way of doing it, if you people out there know a bit of astrology, the birth moment is the ascendant in the chart on the left-hand side on the eastern horizon, and the cusp of the 9th house is in the upper right. It's naturally the sign of Sagittarius. And so he basically was saying that birth is the ascendant and that the cusp of the 9th house is the death point, because Scorpio, the 8th sign, you know, extends from, you know, later in life. The 7th house, Libra, is about partnership and marriage and family and so on. And Scorpio followed that and kind of midlife and to the end of one's life. And it was a kind of logarithmic scale, which means that, essentially it was divided not by single years, but rather by bulk time, basically. And so I thought, well, what is he using to fill in the missing 4 signs or 4 houses, the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th? And he was calling it gestation.
Mm.
And that really struck a note in me because in my particular case, I have the sun basically in the 9th house, which is, in this way of looking at things, it's just after the time when I was conceived, because the implication is that the 9th cusp is the place in the chart where your conception happens. And the ascendant on the left-hand side, the rising sign, is when you were born. So it made a lot of sense to me because my daughter had just been conceived. And so the whole idea was that it just seemed very natural because her coming into being was a little bit confused in terms of influences, and yet it showed very clearly what actually happened. And
Right.
and it was true for my own life as well, because my father went away around the time I was conceived, slightly afterwards, to the Second World War, and didn't come back. So obviously the distress my mother felt was something that shows up, in that gestation period. And I began to realize that gestation was incredibly essential to looking at our life process. Because if you think about it, at the conception point, at the 9th cusp, that your mother and father make love to conceive you. So it also has a lot to do with your relationship, meaning in this context, the sun is your father and the moon is your mother. So the idea is that by looking at a person's chart to see what the sun and moon do in relation to each other, like, for example, if you're born on an eclipse, which is going to be happening in exactly 2 weeks, the sun and the moon are in the same place, which means that at the moment you were brought into the world, that your parents were in the same place. In a similar way, if you're born at a full moon, with the sun and moon opposite each other, it means that your parents are very different from each other.
Yeah.
In fact, they're going to be identified by opposite signs in the chart. So I began almost immediately understanding the dynamic of how this whole system began to work. And when I just overlaid it on charts of people I knew, it just immediately made sense.
Yeah.
In fact, the more dramatic early influences were, the clearer it became. So it's a technique that actually is something that I've been teaching for all of these years. And of course, when you develop something like that on your own, you have to go step by step. And when you come to each dilemma, because no one had translated this particular idea into astrology before.
Right.
So I just had to figure it out based on charts that I came across.
Right.
And it turned out that, there were a number of issues that are quite important, which is, first of all, that often women who have children don't always remember exactly what happened. So in a way, you have to piece it together.
Yes. Yes.
The second thing is that in my case, my mother had already passed away. So I really did not have her there to be able to validate any ideas that I had.
Right. Right.
But the sense was that the ideas that, you begin to discover by talking to people about their lives, how it works and why it works. And these basic principles in gestation, of course, gestation is when your body is created. So all of those influences are stored in you. I mean, they're not things you learned as a child.
And you know what? I
Yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt you, Tad, but the significance and the exactness of when you have the correct time of birth is it's mind-blowing because it's so exact. So, like I said, Lauren and I had a conversation all the way home from the Cape to Derry, New Hampshire, where we lived at the time. And we had her chart out, and before I conceived her, I had experienced a pretty big loss. And Chiron registers just before the conception point. And her Pluto in her 9th house, we had a pretty big laugh about that one, remember?
Sure.
because that she was, you know, she was the answer to a prayer, but it didn't happen that way. But she was the answer to a prayer because it physically wasn't possible according to the doctors at the time.
Yeah, so the whole dynamic of it is that, and again, the interesting thing about it for you out there is that, you know, if you tried to learn it now, you would go through a very similar process that I went through back then, in the sense that the best way to learn it is to try it out, you know, and try to explain, you know, situations that you might not be so familiar with. You know, another one of the other cardinal principles that show up, which makes a lot of sense, but you don't hear much about, is that, you know, your mother, whatever your relationship with her may be, is not all that likely to tell you critical things that happened in your early life, just because that's a natural dynamic for parents to want to make themselves right and, you know, to want to be a guide and so on. So
Yeah.
we don't see a lot of the fallibilities that we come into the world carrying.
Right.
In the sense that we need to, in a sense, strip away the stories and edit the stories so that they actually conform to how we see the world. And that's exactly what happens. I think it's fascinating because, you know, over the years and over the decades, I began to realize that the whole gestation process is really quite profound. I mean, it corresponds to what Jung called the collective unconscious, because we essentially repeat the entire evolutionary process in the womb.
Right. Right.
So we're going from being a fertilized egg to being fully human. So basically the events, the planets in the upper left part of your chart are really a kind of, it's like your ancestors. And in fact, in recent years, I've done lots of workshops on exactly that, which is that, you know, if you look for ancestors, you can find them in your chart.
Oh, yeah.
Because the various planets are going to represent these earlier influences, like, you know, not only your mother and father, but also, you know, another assumption I make is that, you know, we're working really with the genetics of your mother and your father's families as well. So, and this explains a lot in terms of how the chart works, meaning that, you know, something traditional astrology like Saturn is depression, and
yes,
and when Saturn
absolutely.
connects to the moon, it means it's coming from your mother's side of the family, and if it connects to the sun, it's coming from the father's side. I
Right.
mean, these are
Right.
very basic principles, but they turn out to be quite true.
Yeah, and very, very dynamic in somebody's life. And I've got a question here because we are talking about a new vision of astrology today. Why did you choose the title A New Vision of Astrology for your book?
Simply because, you know, when I started doing astrology, which is around 1970, you know, which is exactly 50 years ago, of course, it took me a number of years to feel skillful at what I was doing. So I didn't, you know, sit down and write a book the first 5 minutes, but rather towards the end of the 70s, which was 6 or 7 years later, I'd written articles about my particular technique, but I wanted it to reach a broader, you know, kind of broader audience. And within astrology, it's not easy to do that.
Right.
And so the first book I wrote was called The Round Art, which is in the late 70s. And it was a massive book and very complex, and simply because my view of these things was quite complicated at that point. So some years later, in the early 2000s, I wrote, I felt the need, because 20 years had elapsed from the late 70s to the early 2000s.
Right.
I just thought it needed a book that was more directed towards people who are more inquisitive about things and also who had a little bit greater skills in terms of astrology.
And
So A New Vision, I just thought that I realized that in the intervening years, that although astrological students really picked up on these ideas incredibly quickly,
yes.
as you know, I mean, in one day or 2 days, you can actually really get a sense of the way the whole system works. Whereas a lot of more, I don't know, I guess more professional astrologers were very reluctant to kind of change the way they looked at things, because again, by looking at a person's life as a process is not something that they're familiar with. You know,
Right.
like a lot of astrologers will look at your chart and say, oh, you've got Sun in the 5th house, but you don't know when the 5th house registered and what time of your life that corresponded to. Just
Well,
because traditional astrology doesn't work that way.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here because we got a picture of your book, and I'd like everybody to see what we're talking about, and
Sure.
the cover of your book, and there it is. And this is an incredible book, I'll tell you. This is one of my most loved books. I have a couple of them that not a couple, it's got, you know, this is one of my favorite ones anyway, but A New Vision of Astrology. So I remember, Chad, when being in your class, that you gave us a little transparency that we could lay over the chart, and that helped us, that's the identifier of the age where these planets register.
That's right.
And that is, you know, I use this in my work. Since what you taught me, I was so excited about it. Went home, I took the square that you gave me, and I made it fit big over my chart. So I made a big transparency. Let me show you. And, you know, I tell everyone, this is who I learned this from. So here's my big one.
That's funny.
I used Photoshop, took it to Staples, and so, you know, this is an incredible tool, and, you know, I just think that to identify what you taught me, and I pass on, and others pass on, is, for me, the way I look at that, it's we're identifying the root of where things began. Where did this experience begin? What did that look like? What, how, where, why, timing. So that's what, you know, I look at it that way, but I also, you know, there's an extension here that goes with this into past lives and where those roots are. Do you have something that you'd like to share that can kind of demonstrate that for us?
Yeah, if you just let me share the screen.
Sure. Let's see. Let me, oops.
You know, if you click on, you know, there's a share screen on the bottom, and if you click on it, it'll go away.
Okay, hang on a second here. Okay, so I stop my share. There you go.
There you go. And then
there.
Yeah, so this is the Lifetime Astrology, which is the early name of the system, and you can see this is an archetypal chart, meaning this is the chart that has 0 degrees Aries rising on the ascendant on the left-hand side, and you can see what I was talking about, that the gestation period is this segment, that third in the upper left, which starts at conception and goes down to the birth moment. So any planets you have up in here are influences that happen to your mother while she's carrying you. And then, of course, from birth until, and I call this the, you know, creation of the physical body in gestation, you know, which starts with a sexual act that conceives you, but then, you know, we go through this evolutionary process in the womb. And then, of course, childhood is an emotional body from around birth until about 7 years old, which is archetypally, you know, a third of the zodiac away, or the cusp of the 5th house. So childhood is a series of emotional bodies and emotional issues that happen during childhood. And then maturity is from the end of childhood, 7 years old. You see it goes from 7 to 13 is the beginning of the 6th house Virgo. And then 23 is the beginning of the 7th house Libra. And then 42 is like kind of midlife crisis. You know, it's like midway through life in a way, and then leads up to the conception point, which is also the end of life. So all you do is simply place this over your chart. What Andrea has done is just made a transparency of an image like this. and you just put it on top of the chart, and you can basically read off where, where particular influences register.
Yes.
And it's a very handy device, which I pass out to people when I do workshops. But also, in fact, you can go to my website, A.T.Mann.net, and actually there's a section on interpretations where you can actually download a picture of that wheel and print them out yourself.
Yes.
So it's actually, the whole system starts with an image just like this. And the implication is that we look at life as a process in time, and you can go back to any stage of a person's life to see where planets register, and it will tell you something about what happened at around that time and who was involved.
Yeah, that's an amazing conversation to have with someone, because light bulbs go off, and some people, due to whatever those experiences are, we lost you, Ted.
Really? Oh.
Your picture on the side here. We have a side view of you.
Oh, I don't know where it went.
Let's see here. Let me see if I can fix it. No. Interesting. Technology is quite is having some issues, and I think that there's a lot of work being done on so many levels. So I don't know quite how to fix this. Let me see if I can. Okay, here we go. Start video. There. I don't know if that did it, but.
Well, it says start my video. It wasn't actually about the screen at all.
There you go. There you go. You're good. You're back.
Oh, okay. So the whole idea of this is kind of interesting, because what it does is it opens up a conversation between you as the astrologer and the person who's having a reading. And by knowing when particular things happen, even if people are not familiar with astrology language and so on, if they have Saturn in the 5th house, Saturn around 10 years old or something, it's like by identifying what happened when you were 10 years old, in this case, the 5th house is often the time of primary school, from 7 years old to 13 to puberty.
Mm-hmm.
So if Saturn registers down in here, it indicates some either very strict situation. It's like maybe going to a school that's a religious school, or, a school that has teachers that are really extremely strict and very much involved in discipline.
Yes.
But then, of course, also that also is about creativity, which is the core of the 5th house ideas. So this means that this would be a person with a very disciplined creativity.
Right.
And of course, that's very significant. Just that fact alone speaks a lot about how someone is likely to function in life. Whether they're able to bring it further on depends on what happens in the other planets. If suddenly in Virgo, which is when you start making choices in life between 13 and 23, if you've got Neptune in the 6th house, it may well mean that, the discipline that you created early on in life kind of dissipates a bit, and you lose the focus. And it can also be drugs or alcohol, or just even a very active fantasy life. So the idea is that go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you the foundational there is a foundational picture that you have from Robert Flood, which I find fascinating, and I think our viewers there.
It's right here.
Right, and because this is primarily. As I remember you saying that there's a whole story going on here, and the planets really they're both outside us as well as inside us, and so I think I remember you explaining that's what this picture depicts and demonstrates.
Well, yeah, I can explain that very easily. You see, this little putty up here in the upper right is really a Saturn figure, because he has goat feet like Capricorn, and on his head is a little sand clock.
Yeah.
And so this represents time as a young boy, but you can see he's got a spiral cord that's wrapping around this circular image at the bottom. And that circular image at the bottom has, first of all, a man on the inside circle, and it says microcosm, which means the inner world. And in that inner world, microcosm also means small world. In that inner world is a sun and a moon and a series of planetary rings, and then a series of rings of the elements of fire, earth, air, and water. And in fact, a whole zodiac around the outside. So what Flood is saying is that inside of us, there's a complete zodiac, with the sun and the moon and all the planets and all of the houses and all of the signs. In the same way that in the macrocosm, which is the outer world, which is out here, you can see a sun and moon and a series of planetary rings and zodiac around the outside. So you could say almost that there's an inner zodiac and an outer zodiac, and the inner zodiac is in each cell. And the thing that connects them is the spiral cord, which is in fact the spiraling solar system in time.
Yeah.
The image of it.
Yeah, you have a picture that you drew there. That is fascinating. That is the top one. That's fascinating.
So this image just shows the sun which moves around the center of the galaxy at close to 1 million miles a day. You can see that this shows a period of time, basically, in that the sun moves through time and space around the galactic center, an incredible distance away from it. But then the innermost little yellow spiral is Mercury, and then there's a green spiral a little bit larger is Venus, and then the Earth, basically, it's difficult to see because it's blue, but this actually shows 12 years of time, which is 12 cycles of the Earth around that spiral of the sun. And you can see Mars is like 2.5 Earth years for each cycle is a whole arc like this. So the idea is that this shows the solar system in time. And anyone's horoscope in this image is just simply a slice taken through that spiraling circus at a particular point. And the whole idea is that it's very much the same pattern as the DNA molecule in every cell. So it's like every cell in your body has a little radio receiver that's picking up on the cosmic energy. So we've got planets inside of us in every cell, but also planets outside of us in the universe around us. And they basically resonate, they communicate with each other. And really, that's as simple as it needs to be as an explanation of how it all works.
Yeah, that's, and can you see, I know this answer, but I would love to hear your explanation here of the karmic issues that, that show up in our charts from lifetime after lifetime. And because with your system in a lifetime of lifetime astrology, we can identify these patterns. And
yeah, the interesting thing about it is that, of course, I'm just moving ahead a little bit here, that
yes,
that's the disc that Andrea is talking about and is on the website, basically. Mm-hmm. So where is it? I'm still looking for the spiral.
Yeah. There it is. There it is. Yeah.
Okay, so this is what Andrea was kind of grasping for, which is that the horoscope is not just a circle on the piece of paper, but rather the birth chart, which is right here. If you put your chart down on the desk in front of you, then make a cylinder stepping up above it, then you'll see that the cylinder would look a bit like this, except this is the gestation period beforehand down here. And then the birth moment is just simply that chart of birth time. But then, of course, you continue up along here through childhood and maturity around the edge of the circle. So the whole idea is that as we age, that cylinder fills up with layers of memories. And basically the present moment is somewhere up in here, maybe. The seventh house is around 23 years old or so. So in later life, we're all the way up here in the cylinder, and we have all of these memories below. And in fact, this way of doing astrology is basically looking at this whole reservoir of memories that you carry inside, and realizing that some patterns we resonate with, and other patterns we don't.
Right,
Some
right.
parts of us are easy to understand and others aren't.
Right, right. Well, it's so interesting is the conversation that Lauren and I had on the way home from when we met you in 2014 was that I've done a lot of past life regression, and with your graph of the planets where they register in time,
Right.
it matched up with the past life regression work that I've done. So it's just so naturally perfectly in order.
Yeah, well, the thing about it that I discovered, because I became interested in reincarnation, in getting interested in this technique, that you can see that there are 3 octaves of the physical body in gestation, and then the emotional body in childhood, and then a mental body, but there's a 4th one, which is a transcendent body, and that's the higher level of that death and conception point, which
Mhm.
is like a kind of initiation.
Yeah,
Meaning that instead of mother and father making love on a transcendent level, it's like our spirit and our soul connect with each other. And the whole idea is that this higher level is really the higher octave of the events that happen while you're gestating. So the number of planets you have in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th houses is an indicator of how much you span different lifetimes. And some people do more than others. So
right.
it's actually interesting. You see this arrow that I draw down the middle, that actually this octave of transcendent octave is really outside of time. And in fact, if you look at successive lifetimes, then if you took the same cylinder and repeated it 1 step higher, then the transcendent level in your lifetime is actually the gestation level of your next incarnation.
Right.
So all of your experiences meditating, and having spiritual experiences in this lifetime are actually beginning to create implications that you will inherit in your next incarnation. And in the same way, during gestation, the influences there show the effect of a previous lifetime, the
Yeah,
transcendent octave level of a previous life. So it's like there's a continuous chain.
yeah.
It works very much like the DNA, for example, which is that, we take on our parents, our mothers and our fathers' genetic code, but of
Hmm.
course we're also taking on karmic influences from them, which show up as the sun and moon. So the
Yeah.
whole idea is that this is really about looking at this lifetime, but it's also looking at time in general.
So when you say that life is a process in time, this is pretty much what you're explaining right here, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
And
Because we create these 4 bodies, which they're different in the sense that the physical body is the densest, and it's the most tangible in a way. I always jokingly say when I do readings that during gestation, we don't really get to vote. It's like we don't really have any influence on our parents during that time.
no,
Rather, whatever they do, whatever your mother thinks and feels, gets transmitted to you directly, and you don't get to change it.
I
So
know,
that,
I know. Believe me,
yeah, yeah, I'm a
you,
parent also. I know about that.
yeah, yeah. Tad, there was epigenetics, okay?
Yeah,
And how do life experiences affect our gene expression and quality of life? That's
that's
something that
right.
I find fascinating that you talk about.
Yes, well, the whole idea is that when DNA was discovered in the 1950s, geneticists thought that the genes were a pattern that was immovable, meaning this showed who you were, period. and that there was no way to change your genetic code.
Mm.
And it became clear relatively quickly that that wasn't the case. It turns out that almost everything around us, it doesn't change our DNA, but it changes the way the DNA expresses itself, which is the terminology geneticists use. They say there's something called gene expression, which is that, you may have similar genes to your brother or your sister, or your daughter, or your, or so on, or grandchildren. But that doesn't mean that you're exactly like them, because the circumstances of your lifetime change our genes. They change the way they express themselves. So that's
Right.
very useful to know, because it means your diet affects that, your spirituality expects that. I mean, manifests that, the practices, the things you learn, the things you do, and your experiences in your lifetime all
I
have an
read,
effect.
on that topic, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Tad, but I read about different cultures that will put their pregnant mothers, that are during the process of their pregnancy, and the perfect circumstance that they can, the most perfect circumstances. And it's with, I think Indian culture, I believe it's Indian culture that does that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's pretty interesting that they do that, and that they're aware of, that how the effects are, because I know when I was pregnant with my daughter, the things that were happening in my life truly formed her. She's got a loaded top from most of her energy is from her ninth house down to her birth spot. And so it's
my daughter's very similar to that. And well, that's one thing that isn't surprising.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of it is fascinating, because we do affect by our lifetime.
Yes.
Who our children are and who we are by reflection. So, it really is a process where we do need guidance from astrology, simply because we are continually changing, and that we can actually reframe what has actually happened already. I mean, this is a concept that I've developed in relatively recent years, which is that, when you have a difficult event in life, like maybe you were abused in some way,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a terrible thing, and something that you carry with you by telling stories about it. But it also can be something that makes you stronger. So I really think of, like, the asteroid Chiron, for example, as being, the storyteller of our woundedness. And that's something that's extremely different, and a whole other shift altogether.
So with the 4-body model that you just showed, can you speak a little bit more about that for the people
Yes.
that do not?
Well, that's a very important point, because first of all, it's an ancient idea. I mean, it really comes from even before Plato, the Greek philosopher. But you can see down the left-hand side here that there's, obviously we all carry 4 bodies. We have a physical body that's, created during gestation. Then we have an emotional body that's a set of emotional patterns that typically we learn about or are affected by during childhood, when we're
Right.
raised by our parents.
Right.
And then, of course, the mental body is higher still, which is, it's really about ideas that happen from the time we go off to school, throughout the remainder of our life, basically. And then there's a spiritual body. The highest one is the most, is the finest, and is the least dense. And that really extends beyond the life of your body, which is what transpersonal actually means as a phrase. So the whole idea is that as you go up the scale, the bottom is the densest and the most physical. Then the emotional body is less physical and more moving towards the mental. And then the mental body is, again, higher than the emotional body, and the spirit body is higher. So it's like the spirit body is like fire, and the mental body is like air, and the emotional body is like water, and the physical body is like earth. So the four elements basically we all have, and we can see based on the proportion of planets in each of these octaves, you know, how we are likely to be in life.
You know, would you say, based upon, you know, with this theory, where we're at in our evolution right now, at the end of an age and about to, you know, December is a huge month. Would you say that we have reached that plateau in our evolution as we are about to welcome in a new age?
Well, yes and no, because if you look around, there are a lot of people who don't show many signs of any kind of evolution at all.
Yes.
Although, of course, there are people as well who do show those signs and are aware of them. I think that there's always a mixture, you know, because there's everyone from the most physical people to the most spiritual.
Yes.
You know, and if you're, you know, and if you're primarily any one body, then it means that you're, you know, you're in a particular level of being, basically. And that's, you know, that's basically the way yoga works and the way a lot of other spiritual sciences work.
Yes.
Which is that we all have a combination of all four bodies, but in different proportions.
Right.
You know, the more spiritual you are, the more ethereal you are, and the less grounded you're likely to be. You know, grounding being related to the bottom of the scale, whereas people that are the most grounded probably don't have much of a spiritual or a mental body.
Right.
So the whole idea is that there are all kinds of different ways of evaluating each other. And this system is unique to me because it includes all of them.
You know,
I mean,
I have a quick question, because where we're at right now in the United States, and it's just a very simple question here, real quick.
No, it's not.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right about that. But, oh, geez, and I just lost my train of thought. This is terrible. No, but we're in a pretty poignant place right now. You know, we're in a very, very, very critical time. And
Absolutely.
yes, we are. And Thomas Jefferson, there's 4 times that in history that I believe the House of Representatives had to vote. And there's crazy, as we all know, crazy stuff going on right now, just absolutely crazy from so many different directions. And so my question, or the thing that's I've been talking a lot about on Turn to the Stars is with all of this going on, and I just keep losing the train of thought here, that, oh, okay, coming back, Thomas Jefferson, I believe it was Adams, Bush, and now we have a 4th one where we were in critical places with our presidency and who was going to be the president, right? Okay, and we're coming, I believe that's December 15th, right about the time of the solar eclipse, that they're going to have that meeting, so to speak.
The Electoral College,
Right, so if I'm gonna go ahead and hang on here, bring up the chart. Let me share my screen, make sure sharing my screen, and bring up the chart of the solar eclipse that's coming up right around the corner. And here it is, December 14th, 2020. If you're on the Eastern coast, it's 10:51 a.m. And right, and this is, I mean, there's no, the timing of this is so I don't even know the word to use for this. It's just so much, right? But here it is, the solar eclipse right here in Sagittarius. And here we are talking about a pattern that has repeated, and we're on the 4th time in the United States of this possibly repeating. So could I ask your opinion on this solar eclipse?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm looking at the same chart also. But what's happening right now is a transition, because you can actually see it in this chart that there's a transition from Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn all being in the sign Capricorn,
Mm-hmm.
which is an Earth sign. And Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions have been in Earth signs, I think, for 200 years or something. And interestingly, on the winter solstice, which is in 2 weeks, on the
Yes.
14th, well, on the 21st of December, that essentially Jupiter and Saturn are going to both be at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And so what that means is that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, for the next 100 years are going to be in air signs instead of in earth signs. And so I hope that means that we're going to see a transformation, of the planet in a much healthier direction. And such a transformation is indicated because, of course, Pluto is there also.
Absolutely.
Pluto's about death and rebirth. And it basically means that there are certain behavioral patterns of which we're seeing the very end right now, which could really even be the patriarchy, because Capricorn is probably the most patriarchal sign of the zodiac, in the same way the opposite sign, Cancer, is much more about the feminine. So I think it makes a big difference, for example, to have Kamala Harris as a vice president,
Yeah.
to have a woman
We
for the
just had
first time.
this conversation last night because, in studying her chart, her path is not to be the vice president.
Yeah, well, she may well become president before we know it.
Yes.
And so the idea is that, look at the transformation in this chart. The transformation is from Capricorn. And again, the precession of the equinoxes goes backwards. But, this particular eclipse is, it's got 3 planets and the nodal axis of the moon all in Sagittarius, which is a whole different proposition. It's about a different communication is about to arise. And that communication is going to be very, very different and very foreign in some ways, in the sense that one of the things Biden said many times is that we need to get back into the world, because America's really doubting. I mean, the world's doubting America right now because of the last 4 years.
Yes,
so I really think this shows this transition between Capricorn and Aquarius and Sagittarius is really a major shift in direction. Maybe the age of Aquarius, which I hope is not just an age of social distancing.
Oh, the new topic is, what is your style of mask? I mean, I've seen everything from, what was the one I saw the other night was all sparkles, really pretty. I mean, this is the new topic, what your mask looks like. And I mean, are they?
That's right.
And with the, I just put forward to December 21st so that everybody could see what you were talking about, Tad. 2 biggest planets in our solar system moving into Aquarius.
Yeah, and they're also both, they're within minutes of being together.
Yes, yes.
They're like 1 minute apart.
Yes.
So I really think that that's a major shift, and that we're in the midst of this shift right now, and it's not accidental that all these other things are happening, which is that this is the day when the Electoral College will meet. And I don't think it will, I don't think it will go particularly well, because there's going to be a lot of dissent, and it seems to be that way. But yeah. I do think that it's the dawn of a new era, or at least it can be.
Well, today is what? December, what's today? I don't even know it. The 4th. And December 7th in history was Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And there's
Sagittarius almost always indicates foreign influences.
Yeah. And
it's like,
yeah.
And of course, this is, this chart kind of reflects that in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And I think it's also really about a different kind of communication needs to start arising. Instead of the Capricornian kind, which is all about pressure and force and, difficulties and subservience and so on, I think it has to begin a new era, which is more open-minded and more communicative and so on. At least I hope so, but, there's no way to guarantee that.
Right. Well, people's choices has a huge part, what you choose, how you choose to respond to experiences, and, what does that look like? And, that I've been really studying, Ted, this south node and on this eclipse. I mean, this is a powerful eclipse. I'm not
It's really
sure.
powerful also because Neptune is in square.
I
I mean,
know.
Neptune makes a T-square with the eclipse planets, and it's very, very powerful simply because Neptune is about idealism, but it's also about fake news and a lot of blundering and blustering and so on, which is going on already.
Right,
So I really
right.
think that it is about trying to get beyond that. I think media needs to undergo a major transformation,
Uh,
and that's another one of these messages of, I mean, Neptune and Pisces, which it rules, is going to be there for another 7 years.
yes. I remember
I
when
think
when
about it,
you
it's almost like we're underwater right now.
Yeah, that, I think it's almost, and this is what I've been feeling is, it's actually, COVID is actually, this is the way I look at it, it's a gift, a really divine gift that is helping us to change what needs to be, what we need to eliminate. There's a divine thing going on here, really almost like divine intervention. And I know that many people are in many different ways suffering, and that is Neptune the square. However, I think that what, from myself and from everybody that I've spoke to, going to the abyss is not such a bad place.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah.
Well,
I discovered something recently called Wetiko. I don't know if you've heard of it, Andrea.
no.
You've got to look it up, Wetiko, and it's a Native American term. And it basically means mind virus.
Yes,
And it's just
yes.
saying that as well as the physical virus, that what's going on right now is a kind of mental virus, which is
Well,
about people who are holding on to the self,
and
and unwilling to let go of personal control of things. And that the Native Americans recognized it among the first white people who came to this they talked about the wild and so on, and it wasn't wild, because the Native Americans lived in it as a natural environment. And
well,
so I think one of the messages is that we need to return to Gaia.
that's
Gaia being feminine means we need to respect the earth, which the patriarchy refuses to do. And I think understanding women is very similar to the idea of understanding the earth. That's why I'm actually training as a herbalist right now. And part of the reason is for that, to really come back to the earth instead of having my head in the stars.
well, what I was saying about the abyss, for me, the abyss, I'm also a shamanic practitioner. So for me, I did a journey one time, and this was years ago, where I took a journey, a shamanic journey, and I was taken to the center of the earth through the abyss. And I said, it's too dark here. I need some light. I was immediately given some light. And I had a polar bear journeying with me. And it was a beautiful place, Tad. Beautiful, quiet, no noise. I mean, whether you're journeying to upper world, middle world, lower world, the abyss, though, it can be a beautiful place because it's a place like you're explaining. Buddha sat, there's stories of Buddha sitting while there's all kinds of noise around him, and he doesn't respond, he does not make a sound, he just sits in meditation. There's no, and it's different cultures, different belief systems, and a lot of this Sagittarius South Node with this solar eclipse, I see that. I mean, Mercury, the mind, the solar eclipse is about a new identity.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the past and our past beliefs, and there's so much confusion, yet we're going through some really incredible growing pains here, which is good. As you have described so many times in the classes, squares and oppositions are where the dynamic, where the dynamic growth and realization of differences.
Changes of direction.
Yes, exactly. And so that's what I see. I see that in this chart. And for me, it makes me excited in many ways because we're not meant to stay on that old path.
Right. Well, when you see another thing about this chart is when you look at the, huge oppositional influences between the North Node, which is the public, and the South Node being connected to the Sun and the Moon and Mercury, that look, all of these planets in here are kind of intermediary between, they move kind of around that central opposition like the square does, and like this trine and sextile does, and the sextile and trine here. They're all actually trying to link these two oppositional qualities together.
Yes.
And I just hope that we actually are able to bring that together.
Yes.
Because the fate of the world is really in the balance, I think. We need to turn things around profoundly. And I think the coronavirus is actually helping to bring that into being also.
Yeah. I mean, in the very beginning, it was such shock the world was in shock, definitely in shock. But the awakening that I'm seeing on this earth, I'm sure you are in so many ways, Tad, I know within myself, the awakening, the Uranian influence is just unbelievable. I mean, our codes, I believe our DNA is changing as we speak.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think it's a profound time. And I think that this shift is something that is very necessary. I thought it was amazing that during the height of the virus that places like the canals in Venice cleared up miraculously.
Absolutely.
Suddenly a whole different set of values is emerging. And I just hope that it continues to happen because there's a huge resistance exemplified by our president. But, the idea of that patriarchy doesn't want to let go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's racial and sexist and all of those things. And I really do hope that we can move past this kind of crisis. It looks like we're going to be able to do that, but we don't know.
Well, I was up in New England, just real quick here, and a little example of an experience I had. For Thanksgiving, I went November 22nd through December 1st. I went home. That's where I was born, in Connecticut. And I went up to New Hampshire, Massachusetts, this is where my astrology work began. And I stepped off the plane and I went, oh, the crisp smell of New England, great. But here's a story I wanted to share really quick, was that when I left, I'm checking in at the desk, and there was a lady that, we're all equally created. Doesn't matter, what we look like, what our color is. We're all equally created. And I could see she had a tag on that said Black Lives Matter. And I could tell that she was sort of not in the best place at that moment when I stepped up, and maybe I looked like somebody that just triggered something for her. And I had a bouquet of roses, and I handed her a rose. I said, she was really great at helping me because my bag was too heavy, of course. And I had to take it open and I had to take things out, and she was just so awesome. But, we look at each other, and we, as humans, our past experiences shape us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that eclipse, what you were just talking about, is a signature of what we're seeing in this world, And
Absolutely, and I hope the transformation is from the patriarchy to a, to a kind of multiple society where no matter what you are, who you are, it really does have an equal place in the whole. And I think that that's a necessary aspect. Like Americans, when they talk about America first, to me, that's a symptom of this hierarchical way of looking at things that is really from the patriarchy. It's not about America first. It's America being part of the rest of the world,
yes,
and
yes,
each American being part of the rest of the world. And
absolutely.
that, to me, that's really one of the signatures of this eclipse.
Yeah, yeah. And being that you talked about Mother, Gaia earlier,
Yeah.
there's when we're looking at a chart, is there a chart that, like, if say I bring up, for instance, what would be a chart that we could look at so we could talk just for a minute about the influence of the mother?
Well, you can look at any chart.
How about Thomas Jefferson or somebody, Abraham Lincoln?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the point being that it's so funny, when I developed my astrology system, one of the things that was significant about it was, of course, that the first third of your life was within your mother.
Right.
Meaning your life within your mother is one of the most significant parts of the chart. So the whole idea being that a lot of the male astrologers in the UK revolted against my work because they felt that it placed too much importance on the feminine. And I kept saying it's not enough. We need to place more energy and more thought on that, and in general. In fact, I worked a lot when I first moved to the UK with a group called the Active Birth Network. And I did literally classes for pregnant women so they could understand how behavior during gestation could affect your child inside.
Amazing.
So it's really powerful stuff. Look at Lincoln's sun. It's exactly on the eclipse.
Oh yes. Yep.
And or at least in a very powerful sextile to the eclipse in the sign Sagittarius.
Let me put the eclipse around it.
Yeah, and then of course look at the sun and moon being conjunct in Capricorn are also right on top of Pluto.
Yep, right now.
Pluto now, so it's Lincoln's chart is very powerful in terms of being activated right now.
Here we go. Here's present day chart.
Right.
We have Lincoln on the inside here, and we have the present day transits, and this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, look at that. Look at the sun and Lincoln. Lincoln's sun is exactly, so it's going to be Abraham Lincoln's birthday, essentially. But also look at the sun and moon. Or, excuse me, it's not the sun and moon. It's the moon the moon and Earth are actually conjunct. That combination of planets that are happening right now.
Right, and here's
powerful interaction.
Very, very powerful. There's some really. You look at this eclipse and the association to his soul, and
oh yeah.
And it was so funny when I was up north visiting my sister. She had a beautiful, I took a picture of it, of something that Abraham Lincoln said. And, most of our all who were involved in writing the Declaration of Independence, most of them were very familiar with astrology and had great knowledge, especially Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of all over the place here. I apologize about that, but I think that the connection here and what we're experiencing presently, I mean, we've got Uranus, look at this, opposite his Uranus, North Node, and his moon, and his moon, look at his moon, 27 Capricorn. This is an amazing connection
with Jupiter, Saturn. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. I just thought just to kind of demonstrate what you were talking
Yeah,
about the power of the mother, I mean, or the influence of the mother and where the moon is and the moon sign and what that means from the maternal DNA.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. It's very powerful. And I really think that that's something that really does need to change. And I do think that we're in the process of major change. No
Well,
question.
parents are being forced to homeschool their children.
Yeah.
So they're, being it's mandated that, and I think it's a wonderful thing, people spending time together, because I can see some incredible healing happening here.
Yeah, sure. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good.
So Tad, I am so appreciative of you coming on today, and I just want to share your book one more time. I have this book. It's a love book. And I've taken classes with you 2 times, and anything that you do, I'm usually there.
Thanks, Andrea. And by the way, this is available on Amazon order it from your local bookstore because it's still in print and still available.
It's a great book. It's one that's necessary, and anybody who are, you know, I've always been a bit of a rebel. I'm going to look at things, I was born backwards, and I'm what they call a native tradition, Hyuga. So I'm going to support the natural order of things, is what I'm saying.
Good girl.
Yeah. So everyone, this is a great book. And Tad, thank you so much for coming on today. I
Welcome.
truly
My pleasure.
appreciate it. And is there any advice you'd give to everybody right now as we're all moving through this time and space together?
Yes. Help Gaia heal.
Oh, yes. Yes.
We need to heal the earth and
Yes.
everyone on it.
Yes.
And that's a primary order right now, and it's really necessary and extremely important. I'm working on a book right now called Ascending from the Serpent's Dream, and the idea of it's about women's symbols, and basically the implication is that we need to start treating the earth as we treat women, as we treat the feminine, as essential and integral, and probably a kind of better option than the patriarchy. And
Yes.
I think that that's really a very powerful point to bring in mind right now. Well, thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you about all these things, and we'll be in touch soon.
Okay, sir, before we go, do you have any upcoming classes or any seminars that you have out there anybody could check into?
Well, I actually, this isn't really relevant, but yeah, I actually just wrote an article for a new journal in the UK that's called the Wild Alchemy Journal. And their first issue is called Earth. And so I've written an article about Earth, about astrology and architecture, but also about magical Earth and how we need to really return magic to Gaia, basically.
Right,
So I
right.
think that's an important thing to bear in mind.
That I'm totally in alignment with you on that, big time. And Tad, I hope that you'll come back. We'd love to have you back sometime. We're recording Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and I'm sure many people would love to hear from you again. And
Okay.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. We'll see you.
All right, take care. We'll
Bye.
talk
Bye.
soon. Bye-bye.
Yep.